So it's a pleasure to be here again. And I was asked to address 3 topics, sort of new economic thinking, ecocide and what that means, and law against ecocide, and regenerative agriculture. We're speaking English, but if you have any questions about the terminology I'm using or anything, then please ask me and I can explain in Icelandic or whatever language, you know, German or French or Danish or whatever, you can give it a go. But because for some of these issues, the terminology may be something new to you, and I'm happy to translate over to Icelandic if you like. So we are actually living in a new geologic time, which we now call Anthropocene. This is not officially yet agreed by geologists, because geologists are the ones that divide geologic history into different eras. But there has been a committee working for about 10 years because in order to be able to divide the time scale into a new time from Holocene, which is post-glacial, to what we call Anthropocene, or manntími á íslensku. Geologists need to find the evidence of big changes in geological formations all over the world. And now the consensus is to use they have discussed various times when agriculture started, when industrial revolution started. But now what they seem to be settling on is 1950, because that is when you have peak. That is when you have peak evidence of nuclear bomb detritus, that is radioactive elements in the sediments, in the oceans and in lakes. But we've had a huge effect on the Earth's surface. We are now 8 billion people and rising. And we have not been very kind to the ecosystems that actually are supporting our lives. So in essence, we live on a damaged planet where we have climate change because of burning of fossil fuels. We have extreme weathers, droughts, winds, fires, polluted cities, etc. And society in general is actually not very happy. We have a lot of people who are depressed, live alone, lonely, see nothing better to do with their time than go shopping, which is one of the major problems, is our consumption. And politicians focus, with a few exceptions, primarily on economic growth. Now, economic growth has been exponential for the last century. And the basis for the economy is the use of natural resources. So we are extracting them far too quickly. So the economy the model for the economy comes from the late 19th century, called neoclassical economics, where the market is supposed to solve everything. What we can see now is that it has been field tested and it doesn't solve everything. So, And because the economy and the economic model is man-made, it can't be changed. We just need to make a concerted effort and stop focusing on economic growth as the primary purpose of the economy. Now, in the late 40s, 36 men who were economists, philosophers, and historians, primarily from Europe and the US, came together and put together a program which they called neoliberal economy, which is sort of a neoclassical economy on steroids, where a huge focus was set on economic growth and production as the basis for the purpose of governments. And this was first taken up by Ronald Reagan, and then Margaret Thatcher, and then many countries around the world, including Iceland, because David Oddsson became a big fan of neoliberal economics. But if we have a look at what has been happening in the world, this is from a paper of Will Stephan, who recently passed away. He had a look at the socioeconomic trends and the Earth system trends, which are plotted on this diagram from 1750 to 2010. And you can see that there is a big increase in the socioeconomic trends starting around 1950. And it has been going up ever since. And this is referred to as the Great Acceleration. So the population has grown exponentially, GDP has grown exponentially, that is the economy, world economy, foreign investment, water use, paper production, etc. And in the Earth system at the same time, we have had carbon dioxide increase in the atmosphere, nitrous oxide and methane, primarily from agriculture, shrimp aquaculture, coastal nitrogen, tropical forest loss, and so on. So as we are speeding up the socioeconomic trends, we are also speeding up the decline and change in the natural world. So the Earth system has been severely affected. We are affecting the geologic history as a species, and we have become a geologic force. We move about 10 times more material than all the natural forces, which are, volcanoes, rivers, ocean erosion, etc. And most of this is due to uncareful agriculture. We have been, since after World War II, we were very happy to start the so-called Green Revolution, where artificial fertilizers were produced, so increasing the yield in our agricultural systems. But what was not looked at the time, and people are just starting to be really worried about this century, is that as we are just looking at the yield, we are not looking at the health of the soil, which we are producing the food from. And basically, the man's action has led to the planetary crisis that we are in now. So many countries and communities and institutions around the world have called for a climate emergency. Iceland is not there, but many other countries are there, many communities around the world. I'm not aware of any community in Iceland that has called climate emergency or institution. And others have also called for a planetary crisis, including the Club of Rome, and I'm a member of that. So basically, what do we actually want? There was an article in the New York Times magazine in 2010, which pointed out that the man who is not a high consumer, he is a lesser man than the man who is a big consumer. This doesn't necessarily mean that the man who is a high consumer is a happier man. And so economy, many sort of interdisciplinary scientists have been working on trying to change this trend of focusing only on economic growth, including the study of Donella and Dennis Meadows et al. For the Club of Rome in 1972, Limits to Growth. The book of E.F. Schumacher on Small is Beautiful. It came out now 50 years ago in 1973, and we are about to celebrate. But the one that was most noted was Herman Daly, who passed away last year. He was a professor of economics in various universities, but worked for in the 80s at the World Bank. And he tried very much to get the World Bank to stop focusing on pushing countries under development into economic growth, and instead of looking into how we can produce a steady state economy so that we will not eat too fast into the natural world. But unfortunately, he didn't have the impact he should have had. But he changed the view of many other people around the world, other than politicians. And he said that when the neoclassical economic was sort of designed in the late 1900s, then we had about 1.5 billion people on the planet. But when he was starting to write about this, he was in the 70s. He said, around the turn of the century, 1900 to 2000, we were living in an empty world, so we weren't having such a big effect on the natural systems. But by the 70s, we were living in a full world, and the economy was becoming bigger and bigger, and we were having and the ecosystems were getting less and less space. So we could say that now that we have further doubled the population, we are now 8 billion, we are in an overfilled world. So we need a third square there of economy which has grown, and it is sort of outside the boundaries of the ecosystem. And that's where we are now, because 30 scientists got together in 2009 and wrote a paper called Planetary Boundaries, where they defined 9 boundaries. And we now know that we have gone over 5 of these 9 boundaries. I'll talk about that a little bit more in a minute. So, what sort of an economy do we want? Because we can design it. Do we want to continue with the individualism that we have been living in the past 50 to 70 years at least? And where the market forces are ruling and the focus is on economic growth, then we are living in this era where we are now. Or do we want to change this? Do we want to be a little bit more individual, and not focus as much on GDP growth and make a good world for some of us, which is actually seen in many countries where you have people are living in gated communities? Or do we want to put a plaster on the current system? We still want growth, but we would think a little bit more about the community. Or where I think we should try to go is, and I have lost my the arrow up here, but never mind. We need the great transition, where we actually focus on community and focus on well-being. That is the big change that we need to achieve. Okay, now the computer is not talking with me anymore. Don't know what's going on. Oh, maybe I can change it here, no? Oh, here we are. Oops. All right. That was exciting. All of a sudden, decided not to be asleep anymore. Okay. Okay. A large number of people have now come to the conclusion that we have to stop focusing on economic growth, that we have to focus on other issues which are important. Because focusing on selfish enrichment of the few has left a lot of people poor and behind, and we need to go from economic growth to sustainable progress with every looking after everybody and nature. And in a recent report written by a conventional economist called Das Gupta at the University of Cambridge, and he wrote a 600-page report for the British government, basically saying that the basis of the economy are the ecosystems. Without those, we are not going to be producing any produced capital or infrastructure or human capital, and then we will not have any economy. So if we don't look after the ecosystems, we don't have an economy. Basically, that the economy is 100% reliant on the ecosystems. That was a bit of a wake-up call to hear this, even though non-conventional economists have been working there for a long time. But this was one of the first sort of conventional economists who have been saying this. So we need a new economic framework where we can actually regenerate a healthy world, where we can have a happy, collaborative, sharing society, and an economy which is steady state, if not degrowing for the parts of the world where we are actually rich and consuming too much, and where everything is circular. That's the economy we need to build. And there are many different new economic frameworks that have been proposed, including the circular economy model, which Iceland is now adopting, finally this year, where we need to be able to maintain and reuse and refurbish and repair things before we put it into a circular system. Whether it is the inorganic materials or the biologic materials, and we should not be burning or sending things to a landfill except a minimum amount. This still needs to be set up properly. It's not enough to sort your rubbish. That is an end-of-pipe solution. There's a lot of education that needs to happen in a society that can be well circular. And another economic system that has been proposed is that focusing on well-being, and that is a sort of an umbrella alliance that I was a part of establishing, where you are actually focusing on societal well-being, community well-being, and personal well-being. That is the goal of the economy, and of course then within planetary boundaries. And several countries have joined in under the umbrella of the Economy Alliance, call themselves WeGo, or Wellbeing Economic Governments. So there are now 6 governments involved, including Iceland. And the Prime Minister is going to have a big conference on well-being in Harpa in June. If anybody is interested, you can find the Wellbeing Economy Forum online, and you can enlist yourself to take part. And with that in mind, that we need to be thinking about other issues than GDP, many countries have now set what they call well-being indicators. Netherlands has 22, Sweden has 24, Iceland has 39. Unfortunately, most people have never heard of them, but they were agreed by the government in 2020. And I was a part of a committee that put these together. And they focus on, with indicator under society, here, which are health indicator, education, social capital, security, and work-life balance. Then there are indicators for the environment, air quality, land use, energy, and waste and recycling. And then finally, there are economy indicators, which do have GDP there at the top, but there are other economic indicators, as well as indicators on employment, housing, and incomes. So when the government is focusing on many different issues, then the distribution of wealth and the government budget will go into different areas than just focusing on the economy. Now, but how do we get there? You know, it's not enough to set indicators, although it does help to have them to see in which direction you're going. We need to basically bend our heads and think about how this new economy could be achieved. And one of those frameworks which has reached the biggest attention around the world is the donut economic model by Kate Raworth. She first wrote a report for Oxfam in the UK in 2010, and then she turned that into a book. And what she cleverly did was she took the planetary boundaries concept from these 30 scientists I mentioned earlier, and the planetary boundaries are here: climate change, ocean acidification, atmospheric ozone depletion, phosphate and nitrogen cycles, land use, change in land use, biodiversity loss, that we are in the era of extinctions of animals, and then atmospheric aerosol loading and chemical pollution. Actually, this has been updated since then, and we have actually gone over 5 of these boundaries. So what she did was to put the social foundations inside this planetary boundary circle, where we should provide the critical human foundations, and which were defined on social foundations that had been prepared by or proposed by Max Neff, who is a Chilean economist, which is, you know, that we should have for everybody energy, social equity, gender equality, health, food, water, income, education, resilience, voice, and jobs. And then we can look into how we are doing on this in this era. How can we not be exceeding the environmental ceiling, and how can we provide the social foundations for everybody? And she has linked this with the SDGs. So what's green here is an actual goal, and what's orange is an individual target under the goal. So this is what she came up with, what we need to do. she said, we need, and she is an economist, there are 7 ways we need to think as a 21st century economist. We need to change the goal from GDP to growth, for GDP growth to the donut. We need to see the big picture from a self-contained market to an embedded economy. We need to nurture human nature from rational economic man to a social adaptable human. So this go away from this selfish economic man that everybody talks about to thinking about us as a whole. Get savvy with systems. You know, the economy is a part of a big complex earth system. And go away from this mechanical equilibrium that the market economy asks for to a dynamic complexity. We need to design to distribute from growth. We'll even it up again that this make us, you know, the rich a little bit poorer and the poor a little bit richer, which is actually has been field tested and it's not working. To regenerative by design, that is, we design where the funds will go, and be agnostic about growth. Go from being addicted to growth to be agnostic about it. And actually some economists at the University of Leeds, in an interdisciplinary team, took these biophysical boundaries that we have numbers for over 100 countries, and looked at per capita boundary. And then they took the social indicators from inside the donut and put thresholds on those, and then plotted up where we are. So this is where we are. These are the biophysical boundaries that have been transgressed, up to 7. And these are the social thresholds that have been achieved. So for the low-income countries, they have not achieved many of the social thresholds, but they have not transgressed the many biophysical boundaries. We, the rich countries, we are up here. We have transgressed many of the biophysical boundaries, but we are providing the social thresholds. But if we want to be within the planetary boundaries and provide for everybody, we need to be here. So the new economy needs to take us from here to here. That's the challenge. And it's not an easy way to do it. But because the donut has achieved so much attention, she has set up what is called Donut Economics Action Lab, and now over 100 countries and communities and cities are working with the donut lens to look into how to reduce the overshoot in the ecological ceiling and provide for the shortfall for the social foundation. And basically what she says is that what we have now are extractive enterprises which are trying to figure out how to make the biggest profit for their shareholders. But we need to go to the generative enterprise, which is looking at how many benefits can be generated through the enterprise for the community. And so here are the key design traits. What is the purpose? What are the networks? What is the government? What is the ownership? And what is the finance? So she adds together these 7 ways to think as some 21st century economies with these 5 design traits to come up with principles of practice. And this was first used by the city of Amsterdam, which basically decided that they were going to plan the city of Amsterdam until 2050 through the through the lens of the donut. And they came up with their first report in 2021, I think. So the Donut Economic Action Lab worked together with something called the Circle Economy, the C40 Cities, and a biomimicry organization to generate Amsterdam within the donut. So basically they looked into local issues and global issues, social issues and ecological issues. That is, what would it mean for the people of Amsterdam to thrive? What would it mean for Amsterdam to thrive within its natural habitat? What would it mean for Amsterdam to respect the health of the whole planet? And what would it mean for Amsterdam to respect the well-being of people worldwide? And through this, create a city portrait. Now, this is this was done by I don't know how many workshops with the people of Amsterdam, with experts analyzing the outcomes, and I do not have time to go through all the details, and I can't say that I actually can explain this, but they looked at it, everything within this quadrant I was just showing you. For example, what would it mean for the people of Amsterdam to thrive within these 4 quadrants? And what would it mean for Amsterdam to respect the health of the whole planet? And so you can see here they came to the conclusion that they're transgressing several planetary boundaries. Then they formulated what they call a city selfie. And we came to some new perspectives for policy development and analysis. So basically, looking at these 4 quadrants I showed you, discussing this widely with this people of Amsterdam, they came up with a new policy plan for the city. And so here is the group that was in charge of all these different meetings. And you can see here that this is the Deal community, a Donut Economic Action Lab community. There are individual members, there are events, there are stories, networks, and cities and regions all over the world now using this methodology, which gives me some hope that people are actually working on this. So, Kate Raworth helps us with her donut to think about the purpose of the economy in a new way. There is a new city and regions guide, which has just been published just last week, which is available online and everybody can have a look at. And it will help people sort of ask different questions from what have been asked before about the purpose of the economy and how to live an equitable life, thinking about people and planet within your region. The next thing we're going to discuss is Ecocide law. It will not be quite as long, but I'd like to introduce you to this concept. Ecocide, the term in Icelandic that is being used is Vistmorð. And it has been under discussion, Ecocide, since the 1972 Environment Conference by the United Nations in Stockholm, where Olof Palme, then the Prime Minister of Sweden, used Ecocide to describe the use of Agent Orange by the US Army in Vietnam. And after that, when they started to discuss in the international community to make genocide an international crime, and other related issues. Ecocide was also under discussion, but it was dropped before the so-called Rome Statute, which is the founding document for the International Criminal Court in Den Haag. And it was 3 or 4 oil nations that put their foot down and said no, it shouldn't be included. So, in the Rome Statute, as it is today, we have 4 crimes against peace: genocide, crimes against humanity, war crimes, and crimes of aggression, which were added in 2006. The Rome Statute was signed in 1996. And so the proposal is to add the 5th crime, which would be ecocide. And it was ecocide, the concept of ecocide was taken up by the British lawyer Polly Higgins about 20 years ago, when she realized that people and corporations had rights in front of the law, but not nature. And she decided to become an earth lawyer and started fighting to get ecocide accepted as a crime in the International Criminal Court, because she said all the agreements that we have, like we now have the Paris Agreement and we have the Sustainable Development Goals, they are not enforceable. But if it is a crime, it is enforceable. So you can take national leaders and generals to court and send them to prison if they have committed genocide or crimes against humanity, war crimes or crimes of aggression. So if big corporations are doing widespread ecological destruction, we could also take them to court. So she passed away in 2017, and since then a big movement has started forwarding this idea. And when I first heard about this, and I invited Polly Higgins to Iceland in 2014, I realized that this was the one big step we could take, or biggest step we could take, to actually put a brake on the environmental destruction and on climate change. It was the Swedish government which asked for a further definition of ecocide law, which would fit into the Rome Statute. And they called together 12 lawyers of international acclaim, environment lawyers, human rights lawyers, international lawyers, and they redefined what ecocide means within the Rome Statute. And these are the 12 lawyers. And the definition is as follows: for the purpose of this statute, which is the Rome Statute, ecocide means unlawful or wanton act committed with knowledge that there is a substantial likelihood of severe and either widespread or long-term damage to the environment being caused by those acts. And here wanton means with reckless disregard for damage which would be clearly excessive in reflection of the social and economic benefits anticipated. And other terms within this definition here, such as severe, widespread, long-term, and environment, are also further defined so that it can be debated in court. And why would that help? Well, at the moment, it's not a criminal offense to destroy nature. And so at the moment, we are putting, we are depleting the Earth's nature and ecosystems faster than nature can regenerate itself. But if we put the Rome Statute to work with Ecocide as a crime, then the biosphere regeneration can be helped to restore itself. That is so it would be a big step to be able to do so, because at the moment we have many global risks which are all interlinked. Climate failure, extreme weather, biodiversity loss, livelihood crisis, social cohesion erosion, and they are all interlinked. And if we actually address this in an interconnected way by protecting nature, then we can put a hold onto this. So if we just have a look at where does the carbon dioxide come from? If we look at this from a climate change perspective, for example, before the Industrial Revolution, we had about 285 ppm of CO2 in the atmosphere. Since then, we have added to the atmosphere from coal, land use, oil, gas, and cement. And we would have, almost 600 ppm of CO2 in the atmosphere if there wouldn't be sinks on land and sinks in the ocean that take up CO2. So in the ocean, it's primarily phytoplankton and algae and corals and so on. On land, it's soil, it's plants. And so that has then taken us to the level where we are now. This says 411, but it's actually already a bit higher than that. So if we put on the ecocide as a crime, then ocean, land, and ecosystems can take up further CO2 because we restore them and protect them. And we will reduce the emissions by going into modern technology and energy formation. So both of these are then critical to reach the Paris Agreement. Now, how Ecocide law will actually strengthen international law. It upgrades the rules. It levels the international playing field by filling a gap in international law. So that, for example, corporations and governments that want to operate in an environmental way, they have a better chance to survive. It strengthens existing international agreements, like the Paris Agreement, and it complements bilateral agreements on corporate law. So basically, it would help us regenerate our destroyed ecosystems and draw CO2 back from the atmosphere. And basically, there was one of the writers of the Limits to Growth report I mentioned earlier. She is a big systems thinker and said that the deeper we actually intervene in a system, the bigger effect we have. If we are looking at the parameters such as subsidies, taxes, and standards, which is where we are actually interfering with the world's economic system now, then we are not having very big effect. We have the Paris Agreement, but CO2 is still rising. Yeah. But if we go deeper into the system, then we have more effect on the system. And if we set the Ecocide as a law, then the rules of the system have changed. And we could even say that it changes the mindset, and so that the paradigm that we are living in has changed. That will have a much bigger effect on leading the system into a positive spiral. So this is the intent or the design of the system that we would then affect, and not only the feedbacks and the parameters where people are working primarily today. And we need to remember what I said earlier. It comes out of this Gupta report that 100% of the economy is dependent on nature. And therefore, if we protect nature, and if we need the criminal law to do that, then we should do that. And then, because if we destabilize nature, we destabilize the economy, because it's all interlinked. So at the moment, the economy is operating outside of the boundaries of nature, and we are destroying nature and overusing it. But if we set the Ecocide law, we can bring the economy within the circle here of nature and society. And so if we look at 3 points, which are important, it provides international protection for Earth's living systems on which the world economy depends. It preempts ecocide by making the worst illegal and wanton acts very risky for the decision makers involved. This we are not thinking about that we can have all the big directors of polluting industry in jail. They would be warned that this was becoming a crime, and therefore not continue what they are already doing, or not going into areas which could be considered in the future as an ecocide. And then as directors or board members say to the shareholders, no, we can't do this because we might go to jail for ecocide. And it levels the playing field for business, improving conditions for more sustainable options, and gets the economy into the right place. It eliminates waste and pollution, circulates products and materials, regenerates nature. So we focus on a new economy that is circular. And people say then, how are we going to fund this? How are we going to do this? Well, the money is already out there being played out. Fossil fuel subsidies in the world are $6 trillion a year. But what is called for to stay below 2 degrees is half of that, or even less than half of that. So we just need to decide that we are going to stop supporting the polluting industry and invest in the good industries. That is a decision that can be taken. These are man-made decisions. Okay, so what are the risks? Well, the risks are only for big industries, which are large polluters, but it provides all sorts of opportunities for others. It levels the playing field, as I said, gives legal clarity. Businesses prefer long-term stable rules to follow. We have heard from industry in Sweden, for example. It supports businesses that have strong environmental and social policies, help communities to invest in the future instead of the past, which is, for example, what the mayor of Pittsburgh in the US said. We're not going to support any more coal mining in the area. We're going to support renewable energy. That's the future. It underpins beneficial technology transition from fossil fuels, for example, to renewable energy. Planet-leading businesses will become market-leading, said one business owner in Sweden to us. And it creates new jobs in sustainable technologies, many more than those that will be lost in the old technologies. That has been established by several academic studies. Okay, so where is now support for ecocide law? It's particularly strong in the islands in the Pacific, which are actually drowning. They have already spoken up at the International Criminal Court on that. There are several countries in France which are discussing this at parliamentary and government level. There is a proposal in the Icelandic parliament since last year, which we are trying to follow through now. In Canada, Mexico, South America, in Africa, I'm not aware of any government actions, but there are some active groups. And then there are international organizations, like the European Parliament has made some very strong suggestions in the last few weeks that they support ecocide law. The Council of Europe, which is actually meeting in Iceland, and Iceland leads it now, in May, they made a resolution in January to support ecocide law. We'll see how that will be followed through. And it's also being discussed in the Nordic Council and the Interparliamentary Union and so on. So how will this be done then? Who can propose it? Any member state in the Rome Statute, there are 123 states that have signed it, can propose it. At the meeting of the International Criminal Court, which is held every year in December, then half of the nations that are there, if they say yes, we should agree to this, then it will go into adoption, and in order to be adopted into the Rome Statute, 2/3 of the participants in the Rome Statute, which would then be 82 countries, need to agree and sign, and then the following year it will become a law. So this is actually relatively easy to do. You know, Iceland could propose it, for example, or the Council of Europe, if they actually agree to it, there are 46 countries in the Council of Europe, and then all of those nations actually follow through with it, then we have already over 40 countries. So it's interesting that the Ukraine has been following up on all the ecological damages done during the aggression of the Russians, and they are very strongly supporting for ecocide law, so that the Russians can not only be taken for genocide and crimes of aggression, but also for ecocide. And there are many international people who support it, including the General Secretary of the United Nations, Greta Thunberg, of course, the Pope, Jane Goodall, the 4th President of the International Criminal Court, and others. And so support is growing in all over the world. You know, global youth made this a demand at the Stockholm meeting last year, celebrating 50 years since the first environmental conference in Stockholm, the World Council of Churches, and so on. Then the last topic I'm going to talk about is called regenerative agriculture, which I have translated into Auðgandi landbúnaður in Icelandic. And it's something that has been tested from Australia to Africa to the United States and elsewhere, and is a way to reduce the use of fertilizer and increase the carbon and the fertility of soils. So I have been hearing about this for a number of years, but it was only during a preparation for a big UN food security conference, which was 2 years ago, where I was sat on some preparation panel, that I heard about this, and the big industry did not want to hear about it. But a lot of the sort of ecologically thinking people who were there wanted to talk about it. So this actually became a big debate. One big organization I did not want to talk about it was the Bill Gates Foundation, because they had their fingers everywhere, which came to us as a surprise to me. They just want more conventional agriculture, more GMOs, more stuff that many of us are not so interested in. So the old mantra has been that the world cannot be fed without fertilizers and pesticides, that the soil needs to be plowed, that monocrops are most efficient, it's okay to leave the soil bare, and arable land should be livestock free. This has all turned out to be wrong. Because now with new knowledge, we know that the world cannot be fed without feeding soil with organic matter. No tilling of the soil is best. Multi-crops and crop rotations are best. Multiple cover crops are essential, and arable land should be trampled on by livestock. So, from this perspective, we do not all need to be vegan. So, soil already holds twice as much carbon as the atmosphere and the biosphere combined. Soil has lost about half of its carbon, so it can bind a lot more carbon than it does today. It has been severely degraded in many of the industrial agricultural areas. In some areas, they're talking about there are only maybe 60 crops left. That is 60 years of agriculture, because if we continue as we have done, we will just basically completely destroy the soil. But regenerative practice can increase organic matter in soil, and it has been tested, for example, in the US on a farm I will talk about in a minute, to go from 2% organic matter to 10% in about 20 years. And soil is considered to be unfertile if it has less than 3% organic matter. It has also been calculated that regenerative agriculture, if it's done globally, can take CO2 levels down to 280 ppm in 30 to 60 years. Biodiversity increases with regenerative agriculture, both above ground and below ground. And this last comment here is actually from a regenerative farmer, so you may want to take it with a grain of salt. But he states, at one point of fake meat, which is actually grown out of protein from soybeans and other produce, which is generally produced in a conventional manner with a lot of fertilizer and pesticides, releases 3.5 pounds of CO2. So 1 point of meat, this fake meat, releases 3.5 points of CO2, but 1 pound of controlled grazed beef, which is regenerative practice, binds 3.5 pounds of CO2. So if we eat meat, you should not get meat from intensive farming of cattle in the US or in the Amazon, but from regenerative farming practice. At the same time, you are then supporting the farmer doing the right thing and binding CO2. So it's a win-win-win. Because if you look at industrial agriculture with huge machinery, lots of artificial fertilizer and pesticides, and this is the general food we buy if we don't buy organic, we basically destroy the structure of the soil. We get rid of the organic matter, the bacteria and fungi are gone, the worms are gone, everything that makes the soil fertile is gone. Whereas if we go into regenerative practice, we built up what an Australian soil scientist calls the soil sponge, which is a combination of organic matter, mineral matter, and lots of fungi and living organisms in the soil. This sort of soil is very stable, and it supports a huge amount of life, both above ground and below ground. And even the European Union has now discovered that regenerative agriculture might be good for the EU. And the EIT, which stands for European Innovation and Technology Platform, which hangs out in Berlin, has recently put out some guidelines where it shows that the current effect of agriculture is pretty detrimental, but if we switch to regenerative agriculture, then we reduce the amount of water we need. We rehabilitate the soils and take down carbon. Methane emissions go down. And it can provide us with a third of the goals for the climate problem. So, here is a story from a North American farmer called Gabe Brown, and his story is actually quite interesting. I read his sort of biography of how he changed the farm that he took over with his wife from his parents-in-law, which were conducting conventional agriculture in North Dakota. And in 1993, when he took over, he switched from tilling the soil to stop tilling. He had less than 2% organic matter. Then in 1995, he increased the cash crop diversity. Now the organic matter was increasing. In 1997, he did cover crop integration. And then in 2006, he did multi-species coverage and was up to over 4% organic matter. In 2010, he started livestock integration. So the livestock, when he had actually harvested the grain, he allowed the livestock to go on the land and graze that. And then in 2013, he was up to 11% organic matter. He's completely changed the soil on his farm. And actually, when I started looking into this, I found this talk given by a soil scientist from Australia that I mentioned earlier, he gave at Harvard University. It's like a 2-hour talk about regenerative agriculture. And he reminded us of that about 50 million years ago, when grassland, because the earth was cooling, grassland was becoming more and more widespread. We had huge animals, weighing many tons, grazing on these grasslands. And then we had some predators that, moved them along so that they were not always in the same spot. And millions of years of these animals grazing drew down the CO2 in the atmosphere dramatically. Probably because of the animals trampling down the soil, leaving their excrements, then not coming to the same spot for a long time. So in 50 million years ago, down to pre-industrial levels, we drew down the CO2 primarily with grazing animals, according to his suggestion, down to less than 200 ppm. And basically, if you look at a crop in agriculture, only 30% of the carbon is above ground, 40% are sugars and amino acids, which the plants through photosynthesis send through their roots into the fungi in the soil and are exuded by the fungi into the soil as food for microorganisms, and then they draw in through the fungi and up to the roots inorganic nutrients. It's just like a superhighway of nutrient exchange. And you have 25,000 kilometers of hyphae, which are the thin threads here in the soil from the fungi, per cubic meter of soil in a healthy soil. And lots of carbon and nitrogen and phosphorus. And he refers to this as the soil sponge. Soil like this can withstand drought, holds on to water better, gives more nutrition to the crops, etc. So cultivating what he calls the moron or moron agriculture is the conventional one, which is clearing and burning, cultivation, over-fertilization, irrigation, and use of biocide. And basically we take healthy soil and we generate deserts with time when we continue. Whereas regenerative agriculture has low tillage or no tillage and no chemicals, or at least low chemicals, year-round cover crops, crop diversity, and integrating livestock. So livestock is integrated in the grain production. And then you might say, what about the methane from the cows? Well, according to him, the methane from the cows reacts with super radicals that from water vapor produced by the sun, which reacts with the methane and forms water and CO2, and the water vapor from the soil, which is very full of microorganisms, gives water vapor, which causes cooling of the planet. And here is this professor, and this, for interesting parties, it's very well worth listening to him. He talks about regenerative farming as the ABCD process. So regenerative agriculture, that's A, minimize burning, maximize fixing carbon, as C, and then the dividends are 100% crop yield, 300% nutrition and integrity, 20% of the inputs, 10% of the risk, 300% the reliability, and 500% regeneration value. So it's a win-win-win-win-win. Now, I had been thinking, isn't anybody in Iceland testing this out? When I came across this article in Bændablaðið last year in May, the whole paper was full of, fertilizers have become so expensive and we need more subsidies and we cannot have any farming in Iceland anymore, and page after page after page. And then an interview with Tyrfingur Sveinsson and Hulda Brynjólfsdóttir at Lækjartún in Ásarhreppur, which is by Þjórsá, where they basically said that they were starting their third season of doing regenerative practice, and that they needed 80% less fertilizer, and that the animals were healthier, and they thought they were going in the right direction. So a couple of weeks later, I called him up and asked, haven't loads of people called you up to figure out what you're doing? He said, no, nobody has called. I said, am I the first person to call? He said, yes. I said, why do you think that is? You know, everybody was complaining in this Bændablaðið, and then you were so positive because you were doing something different. He said, nobody wants to change. So I went for a visit, and he has grazing cows for beef meat. And he has stopped tilling his fields, and he has stopped putting fertilizer on the fields. But he controls the grazing. So 4 times a day, he goes out and shifts his electric fence. And as soon as he's out there, the cows come running into the new pasture for the good grass, because they've pretty much eaten everything here. You know, this is how the land looks like, and they leave all their excrements here. And the new grass is full of many varieties, because it doesn't only plant one type of grass, several types of grass, and some grain and some clover and so on. So, and he also said that he used to have back problems, but now that he has to go out and do this 4 times a day, his back is fine. So it benefits for him as well. They also have a chicken truck, sort of with a where the dropping of the chickens can go underneath the truck, and then he drives the truck to another new spot. You know, the chicken can go in and out, you know, lay their eggs here. And here you can see a spot where the truck was last year, where the grass is much greener. And then they have this fantastic wool mill also, called uppspunni. Those of you interested in spinna, to spin. Yeah, spin wool. This is a fantastic little factory they bought from Canada and make some great yarn. So I decided, I asked a student whether he was interested in studying this farm, and so he's finishing his master's thesis. So the regenerative practice had only gone for 3 seasons, but the change in the pH is already 0.1 up. So the more acidic the soil is, the less fertile it is. So it's better to have higher pH, so it's going in the right direction. And some of the micro metals, they were also higher, because they also go with pH. He also did energy return on energy invested, or EROI, which of the farm before and after conversion, and basically it has increased by 23% in 3 years. So a lot less goes into the farming, because they don't use the fertilizer, and there is more yield. So it's a win-win. What I forgot to mention is that when we treat the soil well and fertilize it well with organic fertilizer and stop the industrial agriculture, then the food we eat becomes healthier. So this book is by David Montgomery, which has written a lot about soil and soil microorganisms with his wife, Ann Bickle. And their latest book now is about what your food ate. So if we have healthy soil, we have more vitamins and trace elements in our food than our animals, and we become healthier. And this is all scientifically supported. So today we have talked about new economy, which I think we need. We talked about Ecocide law, which I think will help us in the right direction. And then we talked about new ways of doing agriculture. What did you find most interesting?
Permaculture and regenerative agriculture.
Well, permaculture is a way of doing regenerative agriculture. Yeah, like agroecology is something similar. But what's particular about regenerative agriculture is that you integrate grain and livestock, which is not always done in permaculture. But you need the animal manure to feed your fields. So well, it can be, but it's not one of the key principles. And permaculture is mostly used for smaller gardening and production. There are very few farms which are based on permaculture. There are a few, but not that many. It's more sort of local community growing. We change agriculture, change the economy, and then change the law. Yeah, we need to use all the tools we have. I thank you all for coming, and I hope you learned something useful. And good luck.
Takk fyrir.